Hey everybody, this is Pastor Sam Rambo again with Amazing Grace Church in Charles City, and this is another segment of our Sunday review. I apologize that we haven't done one for last week, and I'm sorry that this one is a little bit delayed. I've been busy. Me and my recent fiance went down to Florida to meet her family, and it was just a really special time. So thank you guys for being gracious to us, and thank you so much for supporting us and being a part of our church family, whether you're strictly online or whether you're with us in Sunday mornings. Just want to say thank you. And yes, we've been having some issues with our live streaming, and we're trying to figure those out and trying to figure out a better way to do it. We have a few ideas. We might post the sermon recording after service, but we've been having some issues with the audio, and I know some of you are pretty frustrated, and some of you have just kind of tuned out. That's fine. We're going to try to fix it so that you guys can have a good just a good experience for our online, but it's difficult, especially being a small church and being a church that doesn't really know how to do all these technical stuff. So it's a big learning curve for us to do, but I just want to say thank you again for hopping on with us and being a part of our church. So we've been going through the series of Who is Jesus, and remember, the reason why we're going through this is because the word Christian means to imitate Christ, and it's impossible to imitate Christ if you have no idea what he looks like, if you don't know who he is. So together we're just going through that as a church, and we're going through the book of John together. And the reason why we're doing that is because John has the most intimate look at Jesus in his life. So the past few weeks we've been going through John, and it's just been a really special time for our church. And, it's just been really intimate to look at Jesus. And today we're looking at one of the most intimate looks at Jesus in his interaction with a person that he really shouldn't be having an interaction with, if you look at it through the cultural lens of the day. So last week we talked about John the Baptist and his kind of sunset of his ministry. And one of the biggest things that he says is that he must become greater, I must become less. And there's this emphasis on me becoming less so that God can become greater. John knew his role as a prophet. He knew his role in life. He knew that the gospel wasn't about him. He knew that his life wasn't lived for him, and his disciples were confused because they were saying, John, there's this other guy that you foretold about, that you prophesied about, but he's stealing all of your ministry. Everybody's going to him rather than to you. And John just has this simple talk with his disciples saying, this is supposed to happen. This is good that it's happening. My life isn't about me. This ministry wasn't ever about me. And he said, I told you beforehand, I'm not the Messiah. He is the Messiah. And he related himself to being the friend of the bridegroom. Because back in those days, the bridegroom was the one who set up the entire wedding. He was the one that paid the bills. He was the one that found the venue, all that kind of stuff. But when the time came for the wedding, the friend of the bridegroom had to step aside because he wasn't the one getting married. It wasn't about him. And John the Baptist knew his role. So then today we're reading kind of the aftermath of that story. And it starts off with Jesus finding out that a lot of these Pharisees are a little bit upset because it was kind of hard for the Pharisees to stomach that John the Baptist was ministering. They knew he was from God, so there wasn't a lot they could do, but he was stealing a lot of their ministry, and he was stealing a lot of their people away from them. So then when you add Jesus into the mix, this guy who's been foretold as the Messiah, the guy who the entire Bible is written about, basically, that's hard for them to stomach. So then Jesus realizes, hey, this is going to be a lot of unnecessary conflict. He wasn't ready to die on the cross. He wasn't ready to do all that kind of stuff. So he decided to skip town, and he wanted to go back to his home region of Galilee. So he's in the southern part of modern-day Israel, which is a region called Judea. And he was born in the northern part called Galilee. But in between those, there's this place called Samaria. And it was a place that the Jews really didn't like to go. And there's a lot of cultural context to this. The Samaritans were a part of the northern kingdom when there was a civil war between the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea. And the northern kingdom left God. They basically left their own religion, and they started worshiping other gods. And in the great diaspora, the dispersing of the peoples of the Israelites, the northern kingdom started to intermix and started to intermarry with the people around them, and they started to mix themselves in with the peoples around them. And the Jews really didn't like that. It rubbed them the wrong way, because for them, they were purists. To keep their religion pure, they had to keep their genes pure. They had to keep themselves pure. And over the course of time, Samaria became like this, if you're talking about from the Jewish perspective, this wasteland of these pagans, these half pagans, half Jews, people who don't really know what's going on, these mystical, these overly spiritual, overly mystical people, and they viewed them as dirty. They viewed them as people you don't want to talk to. They just viewed them as less than. And when you factor in the previous civil wars between their people and their people, you can kind of get this sense of just this extreme animosity, this extreme distrust, this extreme hatred for each other. So what most people would do when they wanted to go from Judea to Galilee, which are the two Jewish sections, they would actually cross all the way over to a region like Decapolis, and they would go weeks further to get to Galilee or Judea, when they could have saved time going through Samaria. But they hated the region so much that they refused to go in there. And so Jesus wants to go to Galilee from Judea, and he makes the decision to go through Samaria. And so you can kind of get this setup of Jesus is kind of crossing cultural barriers, and this is a theme that's going to be more pronounced throughout the story. So when you're going on a journey, you need a lot of things, right? You're going to need food, shelter, and a big thing is water, especially in their day. They didn't have cars where they can have bottled water just sitting in their car. They had to go to the well, and they had to go to rivers and get water. So they stop at this town where actually, if you know the Bible really well, Jacob dug this well, and there was a community around it. So Jesus went to this well, and he's sitting there, and he's not carrying anything to bring up the water, and he's not carrying any jugs or anything, but he needs water. And this woman comes to the well, and if you look at their context, men and women really didn't talk much to each other if there wasn't a relation between them. So if you weren't married to them, if they weren't your mom, if they weren't your sister, cousin, close friend, you didn't really talk to them. It seemed rude, and it was kind of seemed improper. Men and women weren't on the same social status. Women had they had a lot less of a social status than men. And with this particular woman, we'll see her reputation in the town isn't very good. But anyways, Jesus breaks this cultural barrier between the two of them. It says, "Would you give me a drink?" And the Samaritan woman is shocked, and she's like, "Hey, I am a Samaritan woman, and you're a Jewish man. Why are you talking to me? Why are you asking me for a drink?" And it's interesting because she's the one that brings up the cultural context, not Jesus. And Jesus slices right through it, and he says, "If you know who was talking to you, you'd have asked him for a drink, for I provide living water." And she says, "Living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, the one who built this well? How can we get this water? How can you give me this water?" And Jesus starts to tell her the gospel. He says, "I am a spring of living water. And if you drink from me, you will never drink again, for inside of you, wells up inside of you, this well, this spring of living water, this fresh water." And this woman looks at him and she says, "Give me this water so that I don't have to keep on coming back to this well to gather water." And again, they don't have water faucets back in the day, so they would actually have to go to the well every so often, and they would have to draw up this water over and over and over to fill up these heavy clay jars and bring them back home. And it was a whole day affair to gather water. So she's thinking, "Oh man, if I could have this living water inside of me, I wouldn't have to keep on traveling to get this water." But she's mistaken, because Jesus isn't talking about this physical water. Jesus is talking about this spiritual water. And to kind of prove his point, Jesus exposes her for who she really is. Jesus says, "All right, go back and get your husband." This is a problem because, and she even says it, "I don't have a husband." And Jesus is like, "Yeah, you're right. You don't have a husband. In fact, you've had 5. And the person that you're living with now isn't your husband. what you've said is completely true. And she is shocked, and she's like, wow, you must be a prophet, because you're telling me stuff that I've done in my life that you should know. Like, you're not from the region, you're not from the town, yet you know who I am. And it's not like Jesus is going to be talking to the locals because he's a Jew and they're Samaritans, so there's not going to be an interchange. So he must be a prophet, for he knows. And then she starts to change the conversation away from herself and starts to talk about this dynamic between the Samaritans and the Jews. And she looks at Jesus and she says, hey, you Jews worship at the temple in Jerusalem. We worship here. And Jesus says there will be a time when we won't worship there or at the temple. You Samaritans worship what you don't know, but us Jews worship what we do know. But there's a time coming when we won't worship in Jerusalem or at this well, but we'll actually worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And there's a time coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. And then this woman says, I know that the Messiah is coming, and when he comes, he's going to explain everything to us. Because she's calling back to this promise that was made in the Old Testament, the Messiah that's going to come and teach the people what is right and to save the people. And Jesus says, the one that's speaking to you, I am he. I am the Messiah. Up until this point in the story, Jesus has not told anybody that he's the Messiah. Yet the first person that he tells that he is a Messiah to is a woman of no worth, is a woman who has a really bad reputation in her town. So what does this woman do? She runs back into town and she tells everybody about this guy. She says, there is a man here who has told me everything I've ever done. Could he be the Messiah? And in the meantime, the disciples come back from the town to Jesus at the well, and they were out there trying to get food, and they said, hey, Master, we have some food for you. And he says something interesting. He says, no, I don't need food. There's food that I have that you know nothing about. And they're confused. They're like, could somebody have brought him food? And then Jesus says, no, the food that I have, I'm not talking about physical food. The food that I am eating, the nutrients that I'm getting, come out of doing the will of the Father. And he says, you have a saying, it's still 4 months till harvest, and it's a way of saying we'll do it tomorrow. But he says, I tell you, look around you, the harvest is ripe. The time to act, the time to live is now. The time to reach the people is now. The time for the Messiah has come. And his disciples really don't understand what's going on, but it's interesting because then the story kind of flips back to the woman talking to the people, and she gets this whole crowd riled up, and they go outside and they start talking to Jesus, and then Jesus starts to tell them who he is, and he starts to reveal to them, and he starts to heal the sick, and he starts to teach the people, and they start to beg him, Jesus, would you stay with us for 2 days? Remember, this is a Jewish man talking to a Samaritan village. The Samaritans didn't like the Jews either. The Jews were very pompous. They would show themselves. They were Jewish. They wanted you to know that they were Jewish and that you were Samaritan. Nobody likes to talk to people who have this air of superiority. But yet there's something different about this guy. And the harvest that Jesus was talking about happens first among the Samaritans, among the hated people, among the people that are considered worthless. The thing about Jesus is he breaks down cultural barriers to meet people where they are. So if we're going to be like Jesus, we need to do the same thing. Stop looking at people for who they are to society, who they are to you, who they are to themselves. Sometimes I say this on Sunday. We always wrap ourselves in the clothing of our identity, of maybe I'm a white person from this particular family, from this particular town. I like these certain things. I work this certain job. That's who I am. We wear these clothes, these identifiers around us. And some of them are good, some of them are bad. If you've been to prison, you're looked at as a prisoner, right? You're looked at as a throwout of society. We always wear these identifiers around us. But Jesus cuts through all of that. And it's interesting because after he exposes this woman for who she is, for who society sees her as, he reveals to her that he is the long-awaited Messiah, and he doesn't do it to anybody else. He doesn't tell anybody else up until this point that he is the Messiah. Jesus takes the time to show her this new reality. The reality that she was living in, this divide between Samaritan and Jew, is over. Jesus sees her as an individual, as a person. So if we're going to act like Jesus, we need to do the same thing. The days of identifying ourselves in our culture, the day of identifying ourselves of what we've done or how we live or whatever, those are done. Because in Jesus' own words, the harvest is now. The harvest is ripe. And the things that should nurture us is doing the will of the Father. Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. Thank you for being a part of our church. I just pray God's blessing over you, and please like and subscribe to our Facebook page and our YouTube page. YouTube doesn't really send out notifications anymore, so we're trying to figure that out. So I just want to say thank you guys again so much for being gracious to us and taking the time to watch this video. All right, guys, have a nice day.